They always said I was the golden one, the miracle baby, the child who made Grandma Lucille believe in second chances. My parents died in a car accident when I was 5, and from then on, I was passed like an heirloom between aunts and uncles who swore they'd do their best. What they meant was, keep me fed, dressed, and quiet enough to not disturb the peace of their picture-perfect families. But Grandma Lucille saw me. Really saw me. She used to take me on walks through her rose garden and tell me, "You may not have much now, darling, but I've made sure you'll never have to beg anyone for a seat at the table." Her eyes would crinkle behind her glasses, and she'd give my hand a firm squeeze like she was anchoring me to something more permanent than this rotating cycle of borrowed bedrooms and reluctant guardianship. What I didn't know was that she meant it literally. She'd quietly set up a trust fund in my name after my parents' death, from the sale of their home, a few smart investments, and her own savings. It wasn't billionaire money, but it was mine. And it was supposed to be enough to get me started. College, housing, maybe even the seed money for the business I always talked about. Only when she passed away, everything changed. Hey, before I continue, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe to Karma Encrypted so you never miss stories like this. We drop real, emotional, jaw-dropping tales every week. Thanks for supporting. The funeral was expensive and lavish, of course. My Aunt Diane made sure the floral arrangements matched Lucille's favorite lavender. My Uncle Robert gave a long teary speech that somehow included the words family legacy 12 times. My cousins arrived in black Teslas, sobbing into designer handkerchiefs. It all felt hollow. The will reading was the real show. We gathered in Lucille's old study, a room that used to smell like lemonwood polish and mystery novels. The family attorney, Mr. Carmichael, sat at the head of the mahogany table with a folder thicker than a phone book. I was expecting to hear my name. Repeatedly. Grandma had always promised me that the trust was secure, and I had letters, even emails, where she said things like, "When I'm gone, Eliza, you'll have enough to do everything you dream." But that's not what happened. Instead, Carmichael's voice rolled through lines about revised allocations, redistribution, and consolidated assets. When he reached the section about the trust, he paused briefly, and said, "The trust was absorbed into the family estate per 2019 amendment." My heart dropped. Absorbed. I asked. Aunt Diane smiled like a cat. "It's for the greater good, sweetie. Your cousins are starting college, and well, you've always been resourceful." Resourceful. That was code for you can fend for yourself. I left that day shaking. They'd spent my inheritance. My grandma's legacy to me, funneled into Ivy League tuitions, down payments, and God knows what else. My name had been erased from my own future. They thought I'd just accept it. They were wrong. For the next few weeks, I lived in a haze. I moved out of the guest room at Aunt Diane's and rented a tiny studio with peeling paint and a door that stuck when it rained. I waitressed during the day and sorted through boxes of Grandma's old letters at night. I didn't just want answers. I wanted evidence. Because something didn't sit right. Lucille wasn't careless. She didn't make emotional decisions with money. If there was a trust, it was ironclad. And I had to believe it hadn't just evaporated because Diane and Robert found it inconvenient. So I dug. I called Mr. Carmichael for a copy of the amended will. He told me he couldn't provide it without formal petition. I called the bank that used to manage the trust. They redirected me to a family office that didn't answer calls. I felt like I was chasing shadows. Until I remembered something Grandma once said, "If they ever try to take what's yours, look in the ledger." The ledger. She kept a leather-bound journal of all her financial notes in a locked chest at the lake house. That house had been sold after her death, part of the redistribution, but I still had a key. And a code to the back gate. Late one night, I drove 3 hours out of the city to the lake house. My hands trembled as I used the old key to unlock the side door. Everything was staged now, empty and sterilized by a realtor's touch. But the chest was still there. Hidden under a false panel in the master closet, exactly where she'd once shown me when I was 10. Inside, the ledger. Dozens of pages of handwritten records. Accounts. Names. Transfers. And one entry that made my blood run cold. Eliza's trust secured at $248,000. No co-signers. No secondary beneficiaries. As of 2021, intact. The amendment had been signed after that entry. So, what happened? The next morning, I walked into Mr. Carmichael's office, not with an appointment, but with Grandma's ledger in hand. He looked startled, then pale. "You weren't supposed to have that," he muttered. I sat down. "She meant for me to have everything in this book." He stared at me for a long moment, then sighed. "Your Aunt Diane and Uncle Robert pressured Lucille into revising her will while she was undergoing treatment. She didn't fully understand the legal changes, but it was binding." "Are you admitting malpractice?" I asked. He stiffened. "I'm admitting regret. And giving you this." He pulled a sealed envelope from his drawer. "She gave it to me to deliver privately. I failed to do that." Inside the envelope was a letter from Grandma, dated 6 months before she passed. "Eliza, if you're reading this, then something went wrong. Don't trust what they tell you. Fight. You know I wouldn't leave you with nothing. Everything you need is in the ledger. I'm so sorry, but I believe in you." I walked out of that office with fire in my chest. They took what was mine. Now I was going to take it back. It turns out, betrayal leaves fingerprints. Not the kind dusted with powder and lifted under UV light, but subtler ones. A late-night wire transfer. A redacted email chain. A notarized signature scribbled in shaky ink at the bottom of a contract nobody was supposed to read too closely. And thanks to Grandma's ledger, I had the map. Now I just needed to follow it. The first thing I did was hire a lawyer, a real one, not a family friend with half-loyalties. Her name was Veda Torres. She wore leather blazers like armor and greeted people with nods, not smiles. After reading the letter from Lucille and flipping through the ledger, she closed the folder gently and said, "You're sitting on the legal equivalent of a grenade." "Good," I replied. "Let's pull the pin." Veda leaned back, steepling her fingers. "We start with a financial forensics sweep. If the trust existed and the funds were redirected under false pretenses, we can file for restitution. But fair warning, your family's going to come at you hard." I didn't blink. They already did. The audit began the next morning. Veda's team subpoenaed bank records, estate documents, and logs from the family office my relatives had so lovingly created, a shady LLC titled Danro Capital, short for Diane and Robert, of course. What we found over the next 2 weeks was stomach-turning. They hadn't just used my inheritance to fund tuition and house flips. They'd funneled it into investments that benefited only their side of the family, a luxury vacation rental company owned by my cousin Megan's fiancé, a failed dog food subscription startup, and a luxury SUV purchased in full under Robert's name just 3 months after Lucille died. But the kicker? They'd also paid themselves management fees from the trust. Tens of thousands of dollars in advisory compensation. They profited off money never meant for them. Off a teenager who was once shuffled from sofa to sofa because they were doing their best. It was financial cannibalism disguised as caretaking. And it made me furious. We filed our petition with the court in late April, a formal claim of trust mismanagement and breach of fiduciary duty. The moment the court served Diane and Robert, all hell broke loose. First came the texts. "Diane, this is an unfortunate misunderstanding. We can resolve this without lawyers." "Robert, we gave you a home. How dare you turn on us like this?" "Megan, cousin Hope, the money's worth tearing the family apart." Then came the social media games. Megan posted a throwback photo of us at Lucille's garden with the caption, "Some people forget where they came from." I didn't respond. Instead, I posted a quote from Lucille. "Family that steals isn't family. They're just thieves with familiar faces." That one went viral. The hearing was scheduled for May. It was a civil courtroom, beige walls, tired judge, fluorescent lighting that made everything look washed out. Diane and Robert arrived dressed like saints at a charity gala. Robert even held a Bible. Veda leaned toward me and whispered, "Theatrics. Stay steady." The judge began by reviewing the financial evidence. Page after page of transactions, all clearly linked to Danro Capital and marked against the original trust account. Then came the ledger. Veda placed it on the evidence table like it was made of glass. "This," she said, "is the record Lucille Monroe kept until her passing. It proves she never intended for her granddaughter's trust to be liquidated. It also documents consistent communication between Lucille and her bank up to 4 months before the contested amendment." Robert stood to object, claiming Lucille had changed her mind and wanted to support the family collectively. The judge asked for supporting documentation. They didn't have any. When asked about the management fees, Diane stammered. She claimed they were standard practice and approved internally. In a trust where you were never named beneficiaries? Veda asked, eyebrows raised. Diane turned red. The judge gave them a week to prepare a proper response. They came back with nothing. One evening, just before the final ruling, I got a visit. Megan. She stood at my door, arms crossed, makeup streaked slightly under her eyes. I didn't know, she said quietly. I didn't know it was your trust. I didn't say anything. I thought it was Grandma's estate. I assumed it was shared. I stepped aside and let her in. She sat on the couch where I had been reviewing court transcripts, eyes scanning the piles of paper. For a moment, she looked like the little girl I used to share juice boxes with during summer picnics. Back when we both had skinned knees and no concept of betrayal. I believed them, she whispered. I believed everything they told me. I nodded. I did too. Once. She didn't ask me to drop the case. She didn't offer to return anything. She just said, I'm sorry. And somehow, that stung more than anger ever could. When the final ruling came, the courtroom was dead silent. The judge's voice echoed as he read the decision. The court finds in favor of Eliza Monroe. The trust fund was mismanaged. The amendment introduced in 2019 is deemed invalid due to undue influence and lack of proper notarization. All funds diverted from the trust must be returned. Damages awarded, $310,000. Veda squeezed my hand under the table. Robert's jaw clenched. Diane looked ready to faint. As we walked out, a reporter asked, Eliza, what will you do with the money now? I smiled softly. What Lucille intended, build something real. But winning in court didn't restore the past. It didn't bring back the years lost or erase the loneliness of growing up feeling like a favor passed around. What it did was give me choice. And choice is freedom. With part of the restitution, I started a mentorship fund for young women in foster care. I named it the Second Garden, after Lucille's roses. The rest, I used to buy a home. Not a mansion. Just a cozy, sunlit place with a creaky porch and enough room to grow. I filled it with photos of my parents. Of Lucille. Of me. And no one else. Because sometimes, the only family you need is yourself. 3 days after the verdict, the first reimbursement check landed in my account, a digital notification so anticlimactic, I had to reread it twice to believe it. $310,000. One long number to undo years of lies. I stared at the screen for a minute, heart pounding, fingers numb. It wasn't just the money. It was what it represented. Every night I slept on couches. Every eye roll when I asked about the future. Every empty "we're all family here" that covered a silent, selfish agenda. Now the balance had shifted. But the funny thing about reclaiming power? It doesn't always bring peace. Aunt Diane didn't show up at the ruling. But 2 days later, she emailed me. I hope you're satisfied. I never thought you'd weaponize Lucille's death like this. I didn't reply. Uncle Robert followed up with a voicemail. Your grandmother would be ashamed of you. This wasn't how family is supposed to work. Again, no reply. But I did listen to it. Twice. And then I deleted it. Because guilt only works when you still want their approval, and I had outgrown that craving like a dress 2 sizes too small. The fallout came in waves. First, Danro Capital shut down. Veda said they'd likely be under IRS audit for a while. The cousins' luxuries, private colleges, leased cars, trust-funded travel, all came under scrutiny. Megan withdrew from grad school and posted a "taking time for my mental health" caption with an empty latte cup and sad eyes. Second, Grandma Lucille's reputation transformed. She wasn't just the sweet old lady with lavender perfume anymore. She became something stronger. Fierce. Strategic. The woman who tried to protect me in a world that underestimated how far others would go for a cut they didn't earn. I was proud of her. And of myself. But as the noise faded and the victory banners dropped, I hit an unexpected wall. It was a Wednesday. I was sitting on the porch of my new place, coffee in hand, the deed with my name on it tucked into a drawer inside, when the silence hit me like a freight train. I had won. But I felt alone. Not the kind of alone that comes from physical isolation. The kind that follows emotional rupture. Because here's the truth nobody tells you about justice: it's heavy. You carry not just your pain, but the shattered illusions of what you thought family meant. So I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Lena, my old foster sister. We'd been roommates for 2 years before I went to live with Aunt Diane. She was scrappy, bold, brilliant, and had survived more betrayals than anyone I knew. She picked up on the second ring. Eliza. I won, I said. She paused. Good. You okay? No. She didn't offer platitudes. Just said, I'm coming over. Lena arrived with cheap wine and a frozen pizza. We sat on the porch and ate like teenagers again, no table manners, no filters. She listened to everything. The courtroom. The family drama. The hollow messages. And then she said something I'll never forget. You thought justice would fix the story. But it only ended a chapter. Now you have to write what comes next. I laughed. I don't even know what kind of story it is anymore. That's the best part, she smirked. It's finally yours. The next morning, I started outlining a plan, not just to move forward, but to rebuild. With Veda's help, I began researching non-profit models. I didn't want a vanity project. I wanted something real. Something Grandma would have smiled at. I called it Roots and Rights, an advocacy and mentorship platform for young adults whose inheritances, financial or otherwise, had been stolen by family, guardians, or institutions. We launched quietly. No billboards. No viral videos. Just one story, mine. And then another girl reached out. Her aunt had emptied her college fund when her mother died. Then a boy who'd been adopted into a wealthy home, only to discover he was excluded from every legal will. Then a woman in her 40s who never even knew she was owed anything. Roots and Rights became more than an outlet. It became a lighthouse. And I realized, maybe my legacy wasn't money. Maybe it was protection. Months passed. Megan eventually sent a letter. Not an apology, exactly. But a list. She outlined what she'd used the money on, what she regretted, and how she'd enrolled in night classes to earn her degree without trust money. She ended with, "You don't owe me anything. But if you ever want to talk, I'd like to start over." I haven't responded. Not because I'm angry. Because I'm healing. And healing doesn't always include everyone from the past. One rainy afternoon, I found one last envelope in the back of Lucille's ledger. Hidden behind a loose page. Inside was a photo of us, me in her garden, maybe 7 years old, covered in mud and holding a wilted rose like a trophy. She'd written on the back, "To my wild flower. Grow wherever they said you couldn't." That photo now hangs in my office at Roots and Rights. A reminder that the most powerful revenge is a life reclaimed. By the start of the new year, Roots and Rights had grown beyond what I imagined. We weren't just receiving messages anymore, we were offering legal assistance, creating education materials, even connecting survivors of inheritance fraud across states. Some were teenagers. Others were in their 60s. The patterns were disturbingly similar: gaslighting, manipulation, silence. I was no longer just the girl with a ledger. I was the voice for those who never had one. But the thing about taking your power back? It attracts attention, the kind that makes old enemies peek over the fences they thought would protect them. That's when the second betrayal hit. It started with a news article. A small finance blog picked up a story about Danro Capital's mismanagement. Family greed, the lawsuit that shattered a legacy. They quoted court filings, referenced the trust theft, and highlighted my win as a cautionary tale. I didn't share it, but someone else did. Megan posted the link on her private account with a caption, "She's building her empire on shame. Don't let the narrative fool you." Then Aunt Diane chimed in, a Facebook post drenched in syrupy faux grace. "It breaks my heart that our private family pain is being weaponized for social gain. We all make mistakes. Some of us just don't seek book deals from them." I hadn't written a book. Yet. Still, the post snowballed. Suddenly, people I hadn't seen since middle school were DMing me. A cousin's friend's wife asked if she could interview me for her podcast. A distant uncle texted, "Heard you're famous now. Remember where you came from?" That's the thing. I do remember where I came from. And that's exactly why I'll never go back. What none of them knew was that I'd already been approached by a publisher. Not because I wanted to cash in on pain, but because one of the judges who oversaw our nonprofit's resource materials had passed my story along to a contact. I met with the editor, a woman named Tessa, in a quiet cafe near downtown. She ordered tea. I ordered answers. She didn't want a tell-all. She wanted a guidebook, for people like me. For those betrayed by family and told to suffer in silence for the sake of appearances. It's not about revenge, she said. It's about roadmap and voice. That's what's missing in this space. I was hesitant. Until I saw the mock title she drafted. Inherited Silence, Reclaiming What Was Always Yours. I exhaled. Okay, let's do it. The process took months. I wrote in bursts, reliving courtroom days, recalling childhood confusion, unpacking the emotional tax of being seen as a burden by the people tasked to love me. But I didn't write with bitterness. I wrote with clarity. By the time the manuscript was done, I felt lighter. And for the first time in years, I slept through the night. Then came the launch. We held it at Roots and Rights headquarters. A simple evening. No champagne towers. No guest lists full of blue-check influencers. Just truth seekers, survivors, and people learning how to fight for themselves. Veda was there, standing in the back with her arms crossed and a proud grin that barely cracked her usual armor. Lena handed out bookmarks that said, "They can't silence what's written down." I stood in front of them all, a mic in one hand, my grandmother's ledger in the other, and said, "This book isn't just mine. It belongs to everyone who's ever been told to stay quiet for the sake of family. It's for those who've been robbed, erased, or reduced. Let this be proof, they don't get to write your ending." But of course, the family didn't stay quiet. A few weeks later, I received a cease and desist letter from Diane and Robert's new lawyer, claiming defamation, emotional distress, and monetary damages due to reputation harm. Veda scanned it and laughed. "They're bluffing. We can countersue them into next week if they want to play that game." I didn't want a countersuit. I wanted peace. But peace doesn't always come from avoiding war. So I responded publicly. Not on my page. In a national interview. The journalist asked me why I kept talking about it. I said, because silence is what let them get away with it for so long. And the next girl who gets robbed of her future deserves to know she's not alone. That she's not crazy. That sometimes, the villain is family. When the article hit, the response was overwhelming. Messages poured in. Emails from daughters, sons, grandkids. Strangers from places I'd never heard of. But one message stood out. "Thank you. Because of you, I asked the right questions and found out my aunt forged a will. You gave me the courage to speak." That one made me cry. It also made me realize. I'd been writing my own legacy this entire time. Months passed. The book became a quiet success, not viral but steady. Trusted. The kind of thing whispered between support group members and passed under desks in law schools. I used the profits to expand Roots and Rights. We added a legal hotline, a small scholarship program, a traveling workshop series called The Quiet Fight. One afternoon, during a session in Chicago, a woman approached me with a gift-wrapped box. Inside, a rose. Real, dried. Pale lavender. "I knew your grandmother," she said. "She was my neighbor at the lake house. She once told me, my granddaughter is going to change everything." I didn't understand it then. I do now. I smiled. My voice cracked when I said, "Thank you." And then, silence again. Not empty this time, but sacred. I moved out of the studio and into a real home. Sunlight in the mornings. A balcony just big enough for a coffee chair and a book. I planted a lavender bush. It grew slowly, but stubbornly. Like me. Every once in a while, I hear from Megan. She's working at a non-profit now. Says she's learning. Says she finally sees it, the privilege, the assumption, the blind spots. I told her I'm not ready for closeness. But I'm open to kindness. Recently, a university reached out. They want me to speak at their law symposium about financial ethics and familial abuse. I laughed when I read the email. Me. The girl who used to cry into hand-me-down pillows. The one they said was so lucky to be taken in. Now I'm teaching others how to protect what's theirs. Poetic. And as for Lucille? I carry her in everything I do. The ledger is framed behind my desk. Her photo lives in the homepage of every Roots and Rights file. She gave me a foundation, and I used it to build a fortress. A place where people can come and say, they tried to erase me, but I wrote myself back in. 3 months after the university symposium, I got a letter. A real one, handwritten, the envelope lined with gold trim like something off a wedding invite. Return address, Megan Whitaker. No caption. No emojis. No passive-aggressive notes slipped through social media cracks. Just 4 pages on cream parchment. I stared at it for a long time. The irony? I'd spent years begging them to acknowledge what they did. Now that they were, I didn't know what to do with it. Eventually, I opened it. Dear Eliza, she began. I've rewritten this letter 7 times. Sometimes it sounded like I was justifying. Sometimes I sounded defensive. This version is just honest. I didn't realize I was complicit. I thought I was a beneficiary. I thought Grandma Lucille wanted it that way. I thought, if the adults said it was okay, then it was okay. But I watched your interview. Then I read your book. And I realized, I inherited silence. And I passed it down. I blinked. Megan wasn't apologizing just to feel better. She was pulling up her own roots. She continued, I know I can't undo what was done. But if you're open, I'd like to help you grow what you've built. At the bottom, her number. No hope to hear from you. Just her name. And a P.S. Grandma's garden is still blooming. The roses came back. I didn't call her. Not at first. Instead, I forwarded the letter to Lena and Veda, then buried myself in planning our next Roots and Rights expansion. We just secured funding to develop a curriculum for foster care systems, helping youth know their legal rights, especially around wills, insurance, and legal guardianship. It felt personal. It was personal. Because long before Danro Capital, there was a 10-year-old girl bouncing between adults who saw her as a burden with a backpack. And I wasn't about to let another kid grow up believing that was love. Weeks passed. Then came a knock at the office door one Friday. It was Megan. Hair pulled back, no makeup, in flats instead of designer heels. She carried a notebook. And a box of pastries. I didn't call because I didn't want you to feel cornered, she said. But I saw you were speaking today. Thought I'd come. I wanted to scream. To cry. To hug her. To send her away. I just nodded. Coffee. Please. We talked for hours after the event. Nothing grand. Just layers peeled back. She didn't beg forgiveness. She didn't whine about backlash. She asked questions. She took notes. And when I told her that trust wasn't an entitlement, she nodded and said, I'm not here to fix the past. I'm here to earn a present. And slowly, very slowly, she did. She volunteered with the hotline. She proofed reports. She sat in on our teen outreach sessions and never once made it about herself. People can't rewrite history, but they can stop lying about it. And for once, I believed she had. But while Megan's story found a bend toward accountability, Aunt Diane's took a different route. She sued again. This time for emotional damages, loss of public standing, and unauthorized use of family legacy. The irony? The suit only amplified our mission. News outlets picked it up. So did influencers. Public opinion flipped, hard. Emails flooded in. Support donations doubled. Eventually, the judge tossed the case. Called it a veiled attempt to reclaim narrative control from a victim-turned-advocate. Diane never showed her face in court. Uncle Robert did, and left mid-session when our lawyer played audio clips from their estate meeting where they laughed about keeping Eliza out of the loop. I didn't celebrate the dismissal. I went home, made tea, and cried in the dark. Not because I lost, but because I had to fight so hard for what should have never been stolen. 1 week later, I visited Lucille's grave for the first time in 2 years. Not out of anger, but because I was finally ready to talk. The sun was soft that day. I brought lavender sprigs and placed them by the headstone. "Hi, Grandma," I whispered. "I kept my promise." The wind didn't answer, but I swear the air shifted. Lighter. Warmer. I sat cross-legged in the grass and read a few lines from Inherited Silence aloud. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a girl grasping for justice. I felt like a woman who had already built it. A few days later, Lena handed me a sealed envelope. From Vader. I opened it slowly. Inside, a check. $500,000. My eyes widened. I flipped it over. On the back, a note in Vader's sharp cursive. "You asked me once why I stayed with this case. You reminded me that law isn't just about winning. It's about rewriting the rules so fewer people get hurt. Use this to grow louder. With love, V." I didn't hesitate. I deposited it, then called our board and said, "We're going national." Roots and Rights launched a 12-state initiative that spring. We partnered with law schools, survivor networks, and advocacy groups. We translated our content into 5 languages. Every time I spoke at a new venue, someone would come up crying. Not because they pitied me, but because they saw themselves. One man said, "Your story gave me the courage to sue my father." A woman whispered, "You helped me forgive myself for being too trusting." A teenager hugged me and said, "Now I know it wasn't my fault." Forgiveness never became the goal. Truth did. Healing did. Freedom did. And maybe that's the part the Whitakers will never understand. They hoarded dollars. I built legacy. I always thought closure would feel like a period. Sharp. Final. Clean. But the truth? It's more like a semicolon. A pause before continuing, the decision to keep writing when someone else tried to end your sentence. It started with a phone call. "Miss Monroe? This is Judge Halverson. I wanted to personally let you know your petition has been approved. Retroactive recognition of sole heirship. Congratulations. You made precedent." I didn't speak for a second. Then I whispered, "Thank you." I hung up and cried, not because I'd won, but because this time, the system didn't fail me. The retroactive decision wasn't just symbolic. It meant I had full legal claim to everything Lucille had intended. The properties. The funds. The rights to her personal writings. It meant Danro Capital had to formally remove her name from any future advertising, and the state issued a statement acknowledging the mishandling of her estate proceedings. The Whitakers were silent. I imagined Diane sat in her guest house with wine in hand, fuming that the girl she once described as a stray mutt Lucille picked up had just buried her in court. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt solid. Like the roots beneath me had finally settled. I took a week off. No calls. No meetings. I went to the lake house. Alone. It was exactly how I remembered it. The chipped white porch railing, the creaky third step, the wild roses that refused to die. Inside, the same faded photographs lined the hallway. Me on Lucille's lap. Megan beside us. How strange, I thought, that innocence and betrayal could live in the same frame. I cleaned, cooked, and wrote. No press. No law. Just pages of thoughts. Letters to no one. One night, I stood barefoot on the dock, watching the moonlight ripple across the water, and said out loud, "I forgive you. Not for them. For me." When I returned to the city, the next phase began. Roots and Rights went international. We partnered with a UK-based organization tackling inheritance fraud in immigrant communities. Then a Brazilian group focused on estate rights for single mothers. Our model became a template. Our story, a case study. And then Harvard called. They wanted to feature Inherited Silence in their law curriculum on narrative justice and ethics. I nearly dropped the phone. Me. Eliza. The girl who grew up in hand-me-down uniforms and hidden tears. Now teaching future lawyers how to protect people like her. I didn't attend the Whitaker Christmas dinner that year. But I did get a card. From Megan. Inside. No expectations. Just peace. Happy holidays, Eliza. You deserve soft things now. Attached was a photo. A garden blooming in December. Lavender, somehow still holding on. I smiled. Maybe some roots can't be frozen. In the spring, I gave a TEDx talk. It wasn't about revenge, or lawsuits, or takedowns. It was titled, The Power of Being the First to Speak. I told my story in front of 600 strangers. How Lucille left me her world in trust. How that world was buried. And how I dug it back up with truth, grit, and a refusal to stay quiet. The applause lasted 4 minutes. One woman backstage said, "You just changed how I think about family forever." A few weeks later, I was invited to the governor's mansion. They were honoring women in justice and advocacy. My name was on the list. When they called it, I froze. Then walked to the podium. Camera lights flashing. Faces blurred. But I saw Veda in the front row. She winked. I held the award and said, "This doesn't belong to me. It belongs to every person who's been told that speaking out makes them difficult. To every kid who watched what was theirs slip into someone else's hands and was told to smile through it." I didn't smile. I spoke. On the way home that night, I passed the old Danro Capitol building. It was being remodeled. The sign was down. The glass facade bare. I pulled over, stepped out, and stood across the street. For a moment, I imagined Diane peering through those windows, watching me grow louder while her empire crumbled in whispers. But I didn't feel rage. I felt nothing. And nothing, I'd learned, was its own kind of peace. Eventually, I bought a place outside the city. Quiet. Sunny. Mine. Every morning, I sipped tea on the balcony with a stack of letters beside me. Letters from girls like me. Boys who felt like background characters in their own inheritance stories. Mothers reclaiming assets. Sons confronting buried truths. They all say the same thing in different ways. I thought I was alone. But you proved I wasn't. That's what legacy looks like. Not marble estates or stock portfolios. But voices echoing because one dared to speak first. I planted lavender in my backyard. Lucille would have laughed at how dramatic I was about making sure the soil was right. How I stood over them whispering things like, "Grow like we did. Slow but strong." And every spring, they come back. No matter the frost. No matter the storms. They bloom. Just like I did. I don't know what the Whitakers say about me now. I don't ask. I no longer live for the version of the story they tell behind doors. Because I wrote mine in ink. Published it. Shared it. And that makes it real. So if you're out there, reading this, watching, listening, and someone stole what was meant for you, remember this. You can be the whisper that starts the earthquake. You can speak. You can fight. You can rise. They don't get to write the ending. You do.